Welcome again to the Inquisitive Analyst. I have today with me a guest that is referred to as the Everyday BA. He is a senior business analyst practitioner. He's got over 19 years of real-world project experience, and he teaches at University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies, Skill Hat, Mohawk College, and IIBA Toronto chapter. He teaches business analysis courses at those colleges. He's also taught at Sheridan College as well as Seneca College. And he has in the past led software development and business process improvement projects in a blended project management business analyst role. So help me welcome to today's show, all the way from Mississauga, Ontario. That's Toronto, for those who you may not know, very close to Toronto. David Vrbanek. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Marcus, for the wonderful intro. Hello, everyone.
Hello. And now we're going to talk about process modeling today and a bit about business cases. So I thought I would start out by asking you, you teach courses at IIBA Toronto chapter on analytical modeling as well as descriptive modeling. Can you explain to us what the difference between these two types of modeling are?
Absolutely, Marcus. So both are levels within BPMN, Business Process Modeling and Notation, which, as we both know, have sort of become the de facto standard for process modeling over the last several years. And level one of BPMN is known as descriptive modeling, and that is very similar to flow charting. So anyone who's ever seen or written up a flow chart would be very familiar and comfortable with level one descriptive modeling. So it's using the basic set of shapes to outline what's more of a business level view of the business process so that your senior level stakeholders can understand at a high level what's going on, what are the major stages of activities within that process, and be able to get consensus at that level in the organization or that level of stakeholders. Analytical modeling is level two of BPMN, which is more to do with errors and exceptions, right? So more of an IT-oriented view of the process for those that are on the front line, right? Those that are participants in this process and are going to have to deal with those errors and exceptions as they go about the day-to-day instances of that process being run. So that's the real difference between the two.
So I'm curious too, is this sort of technology agnostic when you do these two types of diagrams, or is it specific to technology?
No, it's completely agnostic. You could do this in any particular system that you want, and so much so that BPMN has built out its stencils and shapes to allow for automated execution. So there's an actual level 3 to BPMN for executable modeling. So if you're familiar with robotic process automation,
Okay,
right, those bots that are deployed on company servers to do those really monotonous, laborious tasks in administration, BPMN has a set of language that you can use that would allow for even automated execution of these processes. So more of a workflow, an automated workflow to be put in place. So very agnostic.
Now that robotic process, that sounds kind of AI to me. Am I correct?
There is a level of machine learning to it, absolutely, because what the bots do initially is they observe humans performing the tasks, and they just follow it along and obviously store it in their massive memory banks and look for repetition and see how did they handle this invoice this way and that invoice that way, and then just allow for it to, to repeat every time they see the invoice with the same conditions or characteristics. They'll know how to do it because they've seen hundreds or thousands of them done before through their learning. So, but again, analytical and descriptive are the two levels beneath that third level of executable modeling. So not relating to that in particular.
Okay, splendid. Now, when you
Excuse me.
when you build this business process model of some sort, you obviously have to use best practices. And what are some of the best practices that best practice approaches that you use to develop business process modeling?
So what I like to do, Marcus, is I like to take the same progressive elaboration approach to process modeling as I would do with any other set of requirements that I'm eliciting, right? And that means starting at a high level, outlining what is the scope of the process that I'm trying to model here. Because if you were to put 5 stakeholders in a room involved with that process and ask them verbally and only verbally to tell you how this process starts and ends, you could potentially get 5 different answers, if not at least a couple of different answers, right? So by understanding what I call the bookends of the process itself, what's the trigger that starts an instance of the process, and what is that trigger point or that event that would end it, and get
Mm,
consensus on that. Then you fill in the blanks between
mm,
those 2 points, and then you know you have the scope of the process to start. You then start to figure out what are those major sets of activities that go on. We don't immediately jump into the details and start modeling out the tasks and the decision points and whatnot. We need to take a progressive approach because we could miss something very significant in what's going on in the process and what the process's goals are, to
mm.
make sure that we have that all understood as major sets of activities.
Okay.
Then once we have that, then we decompose, then we break down into that detailed level. We start to look at the individual trees of the forest. But if we immediately start chopping down individual trees and not realizing how much this forest is all about and how big it is and so on, then we can miss out again on some important metrics, other considerations, participants, systems that are involved. And so I like to take that sort of high to low level approach to make sure we've accounted for everything. And we hopefully minimize the amount of iterations we have with those stakeholders
Mm.
to ultimately elicit, analyze, and document that process.
So you've listed uh, the really good best practices you use, and I'm just going to assume here that we need best practices because you need a sense of order. Any other reasons why we need best practices?
Well, it's really that sense of order, but to elaborate on that, Mark, is it has to do with a lot of new and aspiring business analysts' concern with how to go about doing this, right? Most people are comfortable with a flow chart, they get the boxes and diamonds and how it goes along, but to apply a level of structure and apply a level of, methodology to it, having those best practices make sure we're doing our work efficiently. And for those new and aspiring business analysts that have never done process modeling, alone elicited needs in that regard, it gives them that structure. It gives them that method to approach. But as you pointed out, they are best practices. They are by no means hard and fast rules. You'll have to look at your organization's context, your project's context, and determine what's the right way to go about doing it. Maybe a lot of the initial work has already been laid out and you're stepping into the project partway through. So there's no need to go back and reiterate on, what the scope of the process is or what the high level stages of activities are. That may have already been done. So don't see it as a hard and fast set of rules, but as you aptly pointed out, a set of best practices that you would tailor to each project's context.
And I find many times when I'm on a project, I get thrown in midway. And so
Hmm.
a lot of the modeling may have already been done, or at least part of it. So here I am trying to get up to speed as opposed to starting from scratch, right? So
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
okay, awesome. Now you talked about end-to-end processes and a way to be able to understand that by the question, the stakeholders you gather, the questions that you ask the stakeholders. But how you're doing one process maybe in an organization. How do we better understand an organization's end-to-end process in addition to some of the rules that you've talked about for a particular project? Because when we come in, we want to be able to understand, say, for example, how does this enterprise work and where do we fit into this? And so how would we try to better understand that end-to-end process in an organization?
It's about obtaining as much context of that organization as you possibly can, Marcus, from my experience. So that is either work shadowing other stakeholders to see what they do and how they fit into that exact process you're working on or in scope versus a neighboring or sister process. Document analysis, right, as formerly known by the IABA, just going through and reading various documentation that's available in the organization to learn where does this fit into the greater picture. But however, which way you choose to do it, either with non-human or human resources involved, find
Yeah,
a way to build out that greater context as you were alluding to there, right? What are the circumstances? What are those conditions, those constraints under which this process operates versus others? And start to build that sort of architecture or that library of all the overall processes. Because as you're also implying, an organization is a collection of business processes.
yeah,
That is how companies run.
yeah,
You do this, then I do that, then someone else makes a decision on this, and so on and so forth. And my outputs for my process can become an input to your process. So that is how companies ultimately get work done and deliver value, right? Produce those
right,
better business outcomes that they're looking for. And so understanding where we are and all that, right? And as much context as you can build on that the more informed and more effective your analysis will be on the process or processes that are in scope for your particular project.
Yeah, yeah, it's finding where we fit in this big world called an enterprise. You mentioned earlier when we first started out about BPMN, and there's also another process out there called UPN, Unified Process Modeling or Notation, I think it is. There's two ways of doing a business process. Do you recommend we stick with BPMN? Do you recommend we stick with UPN, or it's a matter of what the organization is using or what we prefer to do?
I would say the baseline is you would ultimately practice what your organization is preaching. So if there are established practices within your company that says you use UPN or you use BPMN, then certainly you need to follow that to align with all the other diagrams and models that are being produced. But if there is no such standard or convention or practice set out, I would recommend doing BPMN, because I have found myself that it has such an array of shapes that cover all possible permutations and circumstances that can occur in a business process that it really is quite the palette for the BA to choose from. Now, mind you, the vast majority of your projects, you likely won't go into, I don't know, 5/6 of those shapes there, right? Because they're meant for more specific circumstances that you would find in engineering, for example.
Right.
But that 1/6 can still be quite valuable and cover a lot there, and has enough variety in it to identify those unique circumstances, especially when there's a decision point to be made. Is it just a binary decision, or are there some conditions that have to be present or not be present, or both, right, in order to move the process ahead? So taking all those differing business scenarios that exist, Marcus, and being able to model them effectively in a diagram, I find BPMN to be the best.
BPMN is the way to go. All right, good to know. So for those aspiring BAs or current BAs out there, if you're wondering, hey, BPMN is the way to go. Now, you've also taught courses on business cases. And I know from my experience, I haven't really worked with the business case, certainly not at the initial stages. I've done some reading of business cases and I've done some editing of business cases. A lot of BAs in their career may not necessarily work in this area. So I think it's important for us to talk about it for this very reason, because some of us might want to go in there. What's the importance, what's the value of business case to an organization, first off?
Ultimately, Marcus, it's about providing a justification as to whether to invest in a particular initiative and make that an approved sanctioned project for a project team to deliver or not, right? And I think that's the key that people need to understand, is that not every time someone's trying to put a business case forward, are they wanting to do that initiative? Are they wanting those changes to happen in the organization? They want to make the most informed decision possible up front as to whether it's worth doing this or not. So that's why the key word is justification. And that's why a business case, in terms of the analysis work that has to be done, has to be quite robust and thorough, because they want all that information. They want all those factors considered: benefits, costs, risks, other potential issues, etc., so that those senior executives or senior managers can make the most informed decision that they can, to say, yeah, we're going to give you the $9 million in the 6 months, go ahead and make this happen, right? For some companies, $9 million is pocket change. For a lot of companies, it's not so much. So they really want to be as informed as possible to do that. And the business case really tells the story of what this is all about. What are the possible, alternatives or solution options here? How much have we researched them? How much do we estimate it's going to cost in terms of time and dollars? And then ultimately let those decision makers do what they're doing, which is make that decision, whether it's a yes or a no, right? Because even if it is a no, at least you've now saved the company from potentially going down a path that would have resulted in no benefits for the costs incurred, and would have been a loss, and would have been a heartache and pain and politics and gosh knows what. So yeah, it's okay if it's a no, but ultimately there's a justification that needs to be there on which they base their decision, and that's the business case.
And I was going to say, you mentioned it already, but a cost benefit analysis is all part and parcel of this business case. So if I were a BA and on a project, would you recommend that? Well, let's just assume that I've been put in charge of helping out the business case. I'm not the lead. I'm not the lead on this, but I'm one of the helpers. How can a BA define a business need for a company? Or how can we help define a business need?
We can either do it or help do it, Marcus, by identifying the pain point or the pain points that the organization or that particular business unit is experiencing, right? Most business cases are about solving a problem or problems. There's a handful of them where they are based on opportunities for improvement, right? They
Right.
want to gain competitive advantage in the marketplace, for example. Nothing's necessarily wrong. They just want to, create a greater market share, for example. So where the vast majority of business cases fall into is solving a problem or a problem or problems. So as a BA, we need to identify the specific pain point or pain points that the business stakeholders are experiencing, right? And capture it in such a way known as problem statements so that we have a specific target that we're working towards on this business case.
Mm.
I use the analogy of a bullseye, right? The dart target, right? We're trying to understand the red center, not the peripheral blue or the white in between,
Mm.
but that dead center of what exactly are you experiencing as a problem? Because stakeholders could say, well, we're not getting enough sales or our costs are too high. That is so broad and so generic. Where do you start tackling that? But as a BA, using our elicitation and our analytical skills and our probative questioning skills to boot, we can get them to those precise statements of what pain they're experiencing, who does it affect, and what would an acceptable solution look like. Again, high level, nothing too detailed or granular, but enough that we can then pinpoint our analysis to say, what are alternatives that would address that one or many pain points, right? What are the risks associated with them, and make it very targeted,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to very nebulous.
Okay. So we've got this targeted business case. Does it make sense to align the business case with strategic goals for the company or not to do that?
Absolutely. And if you don't have that information provided to you at the outset of being assigned to
Mhm.
this business case, that's the very first thing you need to do as a business analyst,
Mhm.
is sit down with the relevant sponsor, if you will, of this business case and understand what these pain points that they're experiencing are and how is that affecting the strategic goals or the corporate goals that they've aligned for that fiscal year. Because everything draws back to that, right? Everything that we do, even though some days we may not feel like it contributes to any of that, but
Yeah.
when we really look at it, it's about doing these things at an operational level that ultimately lead to these strategic goals being
Uh,
accomplished, right? That the executive branch sets out
yeah.
for us for the fiscal year. So everything has to align. I've never seen a business case where they went on or they put it out to be assigned in the first place that didn't directly link to one or many strategic goals they had, because that's ultimately what the executives are trying to do. They are trying to accomplish these strategic goals. That's what they are incentivized and compensated to do, right? That's what they do for the company. So they're trying to get those done. So if
Mhm.
we try to do any work that doesn't align to that, that doesn't make a whole lot of business sense.
No, it's not worth it. Now, as a BA, I want to work on a business case. Any recommendations on how I can get to it, because I want to expand my skills. I want to make myself profitable within the company. I want to profit from growth in the company. So I want to work on a business case. Who do I talk to? How do I get on this thing?
So if you are not already tapped on the shoulder by a senior manager to do the business case analysis directly, the best way I found is by making your line manager or your reporting manager aware that you're keen on participating in business cases, right? Because they are always looking for people to help contribute inputs into the business case. So again, it can be as well-rounded and comprehensive of an analysis as possible. So any opportunity that I've had to do that, and I've had sort of bandwidth available in my day-to-day activities, I would let my line manager know and say, if anyone's looking for any assistance on a business case, whether it's just to do some basic document research or actually get involved in conversations and workshops on it, and anything in between, I'm happy to do it and just get that exposure.
Hmm.
Right. So that's what I would suggest to any new or aspiring BAs or anyone who hasn't yet been tapped on the shoulder to do it, is to volunteer. Let your line manager know that if anyone's asking about this or looking for someone, that you're raising your hand. And if it's okay with your line manager,
Yeah.
for you to have some of your time set aside to do that. And any opportunity you can to get involved in a business case, Marcus, I would highly recommend to any of our listeners here, because you get such a deep understanding of what goes on in that company, in that enterprise, how decisions are made, what I call who's who in the zoo, right? Who has authority over this and who's responsible for that. It just creates so much knowledge and so much context that when we go on to do actual projects for that company, we can't help but benefit from that experience and knowing this is the person I speak to in finance about, bill rates and these other costs. These are the people I speak to in sales and marketing about how do I understand intangible benefits and stuff like that. It just, you're able to take all that massive knowledge that you collected through that business case analysis and parlay that into the many projects you do for that company and that are sort of in execution mode. So
Yeah,
highly, highly recommend. If you can get your hands on business case work, jump at the chance.
good. Who's who in the zoo? I like that. Um,
Yeah,
that's I'm going to take that phrase if you don't mind. I mean,
you're welcome to it. It's copyright free.
all right, good, thanks. Um, we're on a business case. We've spoken to who's who in the zoo. Now we want to get support, probably from a project sponsor, because those are the guys who are going to sign off. Those are the folks who might have the money for this project. How can we present this business case to these important decision makers, these stakeholders, to be able to gain their support? Any advice?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're ultimately doing is preparing a pitch.
Okay.
So think of it like an expanded elevator pitch, right? Sort of an oxymoron there, but that's the intent is you are pitching this idea, right? Even though it didn't originate with you, you've been asked to take it all the way through analysis, which is up to and including presenting and pitching it to that sponsor or any other senior stakeholders they may invite to that pitch. And it's really just about telling the story, right? Remember back to your high school English class and what that teacher told you. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has characters, it has plots, right? Themes. Remember those concepts and apply that to your presentation as you're putting it together, and be able to tell that story. And one of the biggest factors of that story is return on investment. Based on the analysis we've done, here are the three options that are the most viable. And of those three, this is the one that I recommend, or after consensus with various subject matter experts, we reach consensus on option B as being the recommended option, right? Because it has the best ROI for whatever reasons. On top of that, you will have collected a lot of data, Marcus, as the BA doing this work. Have that data available. Because in case there's anyone who's going to be involved in reviewing, if not deciding on this business case and whether this justification is worth it, you may have one or two people there, stakeholders there, who are more detail oriented, who are more data oriented. They're going to want to know, how did we arrive at these options? What numbers did we crunch to make sure they make sense to me as someone who's more detail or data oriented? So I like to have those as appendices to my presentation. So not the bulk of it, because you don't want to bore senior stakeholders who care about the summary and the abstract with all this data. Save that data for anyone who may want it or who may ask a question during the actual pitch or presentation about something specific. Then you have that data readily organized and available and be able to pull up and explain. And that creates a lot of credibility, right? That creates a lot of support for the fact, wow, this BA really put a lot of effort to it. I see they talked to all the right people in the zoo and came up to this, very clear, accurate, and complete package that has all these options in it. So remember the story, remember there's data that may be needed, and ultimately it's about presenting what's the ROI, because that's what the senior stakeholders care about. Are the benefits that we are expecting to see from this going to outweigh the costs we're going to incur for it?
Return on investment. Um, what I think is also important is this idea of the summary, the appendix, like you mentioned. Put all those graphs, put all those numbers in the appendix. Tell the story to the executives who want a high level explanation. And if somebody
Correct.
wants to, if someone wants to do a deep dive, then fine, show them that appendix with all the intricate detail. But don't start with the intricate detail, because you'll bore
No.
people, they'll be confused. They won't, that's not what they want.
Remember who your audience is. Senior stakeholders, executives, they want the bottom line. They want the high level story, and it has to make sense. And if they have any detailed questions, they'll ask. But don't start with the detail. Don't start digging into these data points and this data set that I analyzed. It's not the right audience.
No, it's not.
Absolutely correct.
That's
Yeah.
true. Well, thank you, David Vrbanek, for coming on the show. You are a storehouse of knowledge, and I just want to ask also, if there's anyone out there who wants to get in touch with you or wants to take any of your courses, how can they do so? How can they sign up?
They can reach me. They can reach me at everyday-ba.ca.
Okay.
So that's my main website for coaching and mentoring services. But on that site, I also list out the various institutions that I teach at and when courses are available. So it'll be a one-stop shop for anyone's there. And thank you, Marcus, for this opportunity. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate it very much. Well, have yourself a wonderful day in Mississauga, Ontario.
Will do. Take care now.
Take care. Bye.